So, no matter what Boris Johnson thinks, or what any of the Brexiteers want to say about Brexit being done or over, it is far, far from over. You saw the skirmish in the Channel between the French fishermen being exceedingly angry about what essentially Brexit had meant by the British government adding red tape specifically targeting French boats to keep them out of fishing waters, when essentially Jersey and France had their own deal and had got on very well for years. But then Brexit came along and did that deal in completely. And this, I think, is just one of the many, many clashes we are going to see continuing. And not only that, the recent Norway debacle, one of the key things that not a lot of people seem to realise was that the British government actually said in that they were not going to reopen talks with the EU until 2022. Not only that, we've also said numerous times a lot of our problems are seriously being kicked down the road. At the moment, there are no checks coming in to the into the UK, and this is making the UK an absolute smuggler's paradise at the moment because there's no checks. They've all been kicked down the road until at least October or March or April next year, partly because they didn't want to see the embarrassment of having all of these checks put on at once. And like I say, they cannot continue to kicking down these down the road because the EU is going to get really annoyed at it. But today we jump into an article from the Yorkshire Bylines called "Is Brexit Sustainable?" So, as always, thank you for your all support that you all give me. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And thank you to you all for supporting me that way. So, like I say, this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines, and the title is "Brexit, Is It Sustainable?" In January of 2020, as Britain was about to exit the EU, a post appeared on the London School of Economics blog, musing about the mechanism and conditions about what might happen if Britain ever wanted to rejoin. The author Anthony Salon suggested that before any future application, the EU would look for a significant, stable and long-lasting majority of public opinion in favour, and that should be in order of about 60 to 65% for more than several years as a minimum. And this would avoid, quote, an unstable member state or risk another Brexit down the road. I've read similar elsewhere, and it's a typical logic, and it's very logical. And in the EU position, this makes the prospect of revisiting Brexit in the short term all but impossible. However, that is not to say that Brexit is settled. It is far from it. Given that there has never been anything like a 60 to 65% majority in favour of Brexit, and a lot of evidence that most people actually now think that it was a mistake, how sustainable will it be in the long term? Despite Johnson banning the use of the B word by ministers, the question is still a finely balanced, and it will remain so until a significant, stable and long-lasting majority public opinion in favour emerges one way or the other, and the majority is unlikely to be for Brexit. In the years leading up to the referendum, there was very little evidence that the UK population, when asked about what the most important issues facing Britain were, out of a choice of 36, thought the EU was anywhere near the top. Ipso Mori have run these monthly polls for years, and in 2008, after the Lisbon Treaty was signed, right up to 2010, when the Tory Liberal coalition came in, the average of between 2 to 3% thought the common market EU single currency was a big issue. By comparison, crime and economy was sometimes well over 50, even 70% at times. And as late as 2015, with the talk of the promised referendum growing, Cameron touring the EU capitals to renegotiate Britain's terms, less than 9% on average thought it actually important. Since Since there seemed to be no actual natural appetite for Brexit, UKIP and the conservative Eurosceptics, together with the British press, manufactured one and satisfied it with the success of the Vote Leave campaign. The Irish writer Flinton O'Toole has described the Leave victory as the UK winning an imaginary freedom from an imaginary oppressor. In other words, the pressure for Brexit in 2016, he claimed, was largely mythical and didn't seem to stem from any tangible, rational or widespread anti-EU sentiment. However, the pressure to reopen talks is now growing amid major trade disruption and the flight of businesses and capital to the EU. The impact on the UK so far has been far from imaginary. So Remainers are clearly not pleased. Unionists in Northern Ireland who voted for Brexit are now deeply unhappy with the Northern Ireland Protocol and are pressing for it to be renegotiated. Paramilitarist loyalty groups have gone as far as renouncing the Good Friday Agreement, while one of its architects, Lord Trimble, joined a legal challenge against the protocol. Members of the food industry are calling for new sanitary and phytosanitary agreements with the EU to align with standards and ease problems while exporting meat and breeding stock. Scotland's Food and Drink has also joined the calls for the Trade and Cooperation Agreement to be renegotiated with mutual recognition of food standards. The BBC says the pressure is mounting to reopen the deal. Even Shakir, the snake oil singer, the so-called brain of Brexit, thinks that we need at least a bespoke EU-UK veterinary deal, based on a similar one with New Zealand, using common standards to help reduce the number of checks required. Amidst calls to restart the talks to the EU, some ardent Brexiteers are warning that any such move would simply be Beano, or Brexit in name only. They warn of an alliance of UK Remainers, protectionist and agricultural interests, forcing the government into an alignment which the food industry says is needed. So we know that Theresa May's preference was for an agreement that avoided as far as possible the disruption to EU-UK trade. This was an implicit acknowledgement that close trading ties were essential for British industry. The EU rejected her proposals as cherry-picking. Johnson came into office and demanded on the surface to prioritise sovereignty at all costs. However, even in May of 2020, Barnier was still noting that the UK continues to demand a simple Canada-style trade deal while retaining the single market advantages in innumerable sectors. The EU would not yield to that. The day before the signing of the trade deal on Christmas Eve of 2020, the UK was still trying to present with the EU with a legal text which Barnier claimed was peppered with traps, false compromises and backward steps. Does this sound like a deal that the UK government is generally actually satisfied with? And at the 2016 referendum result saw the 48% who wished to remain losing to the 52%. The Leave coalition that believed they were all voting for the same thing. In fact, they were voting against a variety of different things, all blaming, rightly or wrongly, on the EU. Note the reverse of how the UK general election decisions are made in our first past the post system. Supposedly ranges from different parties with whole different aims, usually to create a majority of voters against the winning party, but they are deemed to have lost. In the referendum, they won. This was always likely to make reaching a consensus about the UK's post-Brexit status difficult, if not impossible. And so it has proved. Johnson seems to have, quote, satisfied almost no one with a significant majority to support his Brexit, and this will remain an issue. Professor Chris Gray, who writes exclusively about Brexit, is seemingly at the foremost authority on it, as the forthcoming book, Brexit Unfolded, How No One Got What They Wanted and Why We're Never Going to Get It. The title is an astute observation of where we are. So, are there any realistic negotiations of changes being negotiated? The answer is no, at least not in the short term. As several trade experts have pointed out, this is not how trade deals work. Those in the British industry looking to the Partnership Council, the joint body of which will oversee the TCA, have provided relief, are likely to be disappointed. These bodies are common in the EU trade deals and meet infrequently to resolve minor technical issues or to clarify matters. They do not and cannot change the basic terms of the deal. And there is little pressure on Brussels to actually renegotiate the deal, which preserves and probably increases a huge trade surplus in goods with Britain. And Lord Frost, questioned about it in the House of Lords at the end of March, appeared to rule out any changes to help the food and drink sector because it would mean having to, quote, accept the laws of the European Union, which he says was quite a considerable downside. And so there appears to be no foreseeable prospect of change in the future. So the two sides are currently trying to put considerable effort into finding ways to make the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol more acceptable to citizens in the province. The Financial Times ran a recent article suggesting that the UK was throwing the kitchen sink at the deal to make it work. Johnson, on one hand, has, in his confused metaphors, talks about sandpapering the barnacles off his protocol like a demented ship repairer. Tony Kendall, the Irish broadcaster of RTE, reports the beginnings of what may be an agreement offering some estimates to try and reduce disruption at Ulster ports. But the EU is taking a hard line. It is offering the UK government a choice between a small piecemeal easements or a wider structural change where the UK aligns with the EU SPS rules, something the UK will not contemplate, as we have seen. One possible solution being discussed are any alignment to be temporary until one or the other sides has decided the need to diverge due to the US trade deal, for example. This would push the problem into the future, but it would not resolve the issue. The risk-based approach favoured by many pro-Brexiteers politicians, where foodstuffs entering Northern Ireland would be assessed on the likelihood of them entering the EU market, has been emphatically ruled out. It seems the loyalists and those calling for the Northern Ireland Protocol to be scrapped will be also disappointed. So Britain has had to accept a lot of the unpalatable truths, of which perhaps the most difficult is the fact that the EU has had the upper hand from the onset. In October of 2016, Theresa May said that Britain would not be supplicant in the talks with the EU. But in the last 5 years, despite a lot of the tub-thumping rhetoric, that we have barely stopped bending the knee. The row of the summer on the sequencing of the talks ended in humiliation as Britain caved into the EU. And the withdrawal agreement covered money, citizens' rights and the Irish border question, signed before any trade talks could even begin. And we paid, and we will continue to pay, the divorce bill that Brexiteers claimed we have no legal obligation to settle. Two Conservative Prime Ministers assured the DUP that they would never allow a border to divide the nation. Now we have a trade border in the Irish Sea. Michael Gove similarly assured the Scots fishermen that agreement on fish would not be part of any trade deal. It was, and now has heavily stacked in the EU's favour. Britain has finally granted the EU's ambassador the same diplomatic immunity as ambassadors from other nation states after refusing to do so because the EU was, quote, an international organisation, and recognising the EU's envoy would supposedly create some kind of precedent. These events and others are characteristic of the highly asymmetrical relationship as the UK as a junior partner. Oh, and by the way, apparently that got forced because apparently it was Joe Biden put pressure on Boris Johnson to make that happen. Interesting. So why many so capitulations? Well, the stark truth is that the threats to leave without either withdrawal agreement or trade agreements were always empty ones. Despite the need to keep the bare minimum of access to the single market meant that there was never a realistic proposition. Almost all the concessions need to reach both agreements came from the UK side, and in exchange we have fractured a nation and thin and tariff quota-free trade deals for qualifying goods plus basic agreements on various sectors important to the EU like aviation, road haulage and energy. We are only marginally above rock-bottom World Trade Organization terms. The sovereignty and the red line has come at a considerable cost, and there is no evidence that the UK-EU future relationship will be any more symmetrical. When the European Parliament ratified the TCA, Lord Frost welcomed the decision with a tweet and hailed it as a start of a new chapter, characterised by friendly cooperation between sovereign equals. Michael Duggan, the Professor of European Law at the University of Liverpool, quickly pointed out that the EU isn't sovereign and the UK isn't its equal. It does, however, point to one of the many delusions behind Brexit. Under May in 2018, the British government put out a series of future framework papers, many of which looked like requests from an ascension country talking of a deep and special partnership. It culminated in the white paper in July that the EU rejected as cherry-picking. David Davis and Boris Johnson both resigned over it. And around that time, Crispin Blunt, the then chair of the Defence Select Committee, was hawking ideas around Europe for a common defence and security policy after Brexit. This came to nothing as well. But an EU subcommittee produced a report in May of 2018 that gives a fascinating insight into EU scepticism of May's approach and why it failed. It said, "Its issue the UK continuing with the shape of EU policies after Brexit that ultimately reflects of all the difficulties of the British Euro-British divorce. If, as a third country, the British should remain involved one way or another in the decision-making of the bodies, as we are fact being called to allow to do so by them, it will end up with a status that is equivalent to the whole of the EU, which means that London would carry the same weight as 27 capitals. Ultimately, it is exactly what May meant when she said in a speech in Florence that a country wanted to work hand in hand with the European Union rather than as part of the European Union. Make no mistake, May and those in favour of leaving in the EU believed that they could continue to wield influence in Brussels after Brexit, and perhaps even more influence than had as a member. We saw ourselves not as the sovereign equal, but as a far above all the 27 member states put together. And many of those who voted for Brexit still do. So that is essentially will be it. As you can see already, this proves it is nowhere near sustainable at all. And that is the problem that we will be seeing constantly from now on, of the UK government butting heads, and as long as we have essentially this Conservative government, probably some more gunboat diplomacy, which is absolutely ridiculous. But as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Please do remember to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out, and of course down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link as well called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time.